The morning Ethan Carter disappeared, every financial newspaper in America ran the same headline: Billionaire heir missing before major family announcement. Reporters assumed he'd been kidnapped. Investors whispered about a succession crisis. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. No one imagined the truth. At that exact moment, the only son of billionaire banking legend Richard Carter was standing in front of a cracked bathroom mirror inside a tiny apartment, carefully buttoning a faded security guard uniform that cost less than one of his father's silk ties. He stared at his reflection for several seconds before forcing a smile. "Today," he whispered, "someone will finally see me instead of my last name." That simple sentence would change his life forever. For as long as Ethan could remember, his identity had never truly belonged to him. He wasn't Ethan. He was Richard Carter's son, the future owner of Carter National Bank, the youngest billionaire heir in the country. People stood when he entered rooms. Restaurants magically found tables. Luxury dealerships opened after hours just because he wanted to look at a new model. Every conversation felt rehearsed. Every compliment came with hidden expectations. Every relationship eventually became a negotiation. By the age of 30, Ethan had dated actresses, influencers, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and daughters of some of the wealthiest families in America. Every relationship followed the same painful script. Everything felt genuine, until someone mentioned inheritance, or company shares, or the Carter family fortune. Then love quietly transformed into business. His father had stopped believing in coincidence years earlier. "People don't chase people," Richard often said. "They chase opportunity." Unfortunately, Ethan had begun believing him. Richard Carter hadn't built one of America's largest private banking empires by trusting easily. He had grown up poor, sleeping in the back room of his parents' grocery store before earning a scholarship, becoming an investment banker, and eventually founding Carter National Bank from a single office. Decades later, his institution operated hundreds of branches across the country. Governments respected him. Politicians courted him. Business magazines called him one of the most disciplined men in finance. At home, however, Richard remained a demanding father. One evening, he invited Ethan to dinner at the family's estate. The meal was flawless. Crystal glasses, fresh flowers, a dining room larger than most apartments. But Richard barely touched his food. Instead, he slid a leather folder across the table. "I've narrowed the list." Ethan frowned. The list? Potential wives. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Richard continued, as if discussing investment portfolios. "Families with influence. Excellent reputations. Strong business backgrounds. Any one of these women would strengthen the company." Ethan slowly closed the folder, without looking inside. "I'm not interviewing candidates for a merger. I'm talking about your future." "No," Ethan replied quietly. "You're talking about yours." Silence filled the room. Richard leaned back. "You'll inherit this bank one day." "I know." "Then start acting like it." Ethan stood. "I want someone who chooses me before she knows who I am." Richard almost laughed. "That woman doesn't exist." "We'll see." That same night, Ethan made a decision no one expected. He contacted an old college friend who owned a private security company. Within days, fake employment records had been prepared. His beard was trimmed differently. His expensive haircut disappeared beneath a simple buzz cut. Designer suits were replaced with inexpensive uniforms. His luxury penthouse was exchanged for a small one-bedroom apartment on the opposite side of the city. Even his name changed. From Ethan Carter to Ethan Brooks, a temporary security guard assigned to one of the smallest Carter National Bank branches. Ironically, not a single executive recognized the owner's son. His first morning began before sunrise. The branch manager, Daniel Morrison, barely glanced at him. "So you're the new guard?" "Yes, sir." Daniel handed him a faded clipboard. "You're temporary. Stay out of everyone's way." No welcome, no handshake, no introduction. By 8 o'clock, customers had begun arriving. Some smiled politely. Many ignored him completely. One wealthy businessman tossed his car keys toward Ethan without even making eye contact. "Park it." "I'm sorry, sir. I'm security." The man rolled his eyes. then find someone useful. Another customer complained because Ethan hadn't opened the glass door quickly enough. An executive blamed him when a delivery arrived late. Every mistake somehow became the security guard's fault. By lunchtime, his feet hurt. His back ached. Nobody invited him to eat with them. He sat alone on a bench outside, quietly eating a cheap sandwich from a paper bag. Oddly enough, it was the most peaceful lunch he'd had in years. No photographers. No assistants. No board members asking about quarterly earnings. Just silence. For the first time in a long time, he felt almost invisible. And strangely, he liked it. Late that afternoon, as customers slowly disappeared, Ethan noticed someone helping an elderly woman struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags near the bank entrance. The young woman wasn't a teller. She wasn't a customer either. She wore simple clothes beneath a janitor's apron and smiled as if kindness required no effort. Without hesitation, she carried the bags all the way to the woman's car before returning inside. As she walked past the entrance, Ethan instinctively held the door open for her. She stopped, looked directly into his eyes, and smiled. Not because of his money, not because of his family, not because of his name, just because he'd held a door. "Thank you," she said warmly. "My name's Emily." For reasons Ethan couldn't explain, that single smile stayed with him long after she disappeared down the hallway. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the branch earlier than everyone else. The city was still waking up, and the sidewalks were nearly empty. He unlocked the front gate, checked the security cameras, and began the routine his supervisor had shown him the day before. As he finished his inspection, he heard footsteps behind him. "Good morning, Ethan."
He turned.
Emily stood there carrying 2 paper coffee cups. "I noticed you were here early yesterday," she said with a smile. "I figured security guards deserve coffee too." For a brief second, Ethan forgot how to answer. No one had ever brought him coffee before. At least not without expecting something in return. "Thank you. It's just coffee," she laughed. "No," he replied quietly. "It's more than that." She didn't understand why those simple words carried so much weight. Days slowly turned into weeks. Without planning it, they developed small routines. Every morning, Emily greeted him before starting her cleaning shift. Every afternoon, they exchanged a few conversations before she left. Sometimes they walked to the nearby bus stop together. She believed Ethan lived in a modest apartment because security jobs barely paid enough to cover rent. He never corrected her. Instead, he asked questions. "What did you want to be when you were a kid?" "A teacher." "And now?" "I still am." Ethan looked confused. "You clean the bank." She smiled. "I teach 3rd grade in the mornings." Seeing his surprised expression, she laughed. "The school's salary isn't enough. So, I clean here in the evenings." "It must be exhausting." "It is." "Then why do it?" Emily looked across the street where children were playing in a small park. "Because my students deserve a teacher who doesn't give up." That answer stayed with Ethan all day. He had met CEOs who couldn't explain why they worked. Emily, who earned less in a month than he once spent on a watch, knew exactly why she woke up every morning. Life inside the bank remained very different. Branch manager Daniel Morrison continued treating Ethan as though he barely existed. "Security." Daniel snapped his fingers one afternoon. "The sidewalk needs sweeping. I'm responsible for building security. Today you're responsible for whatever I tell you." Several employees looked away, pretending not to notice. Ethan quietly picked up the broom. Years earlier, assistants had rushed to carry his briefcase. Now he was sweeping leaves while customers walked past without a second glance. Oddly enough, he wasn't embarrassed. He was learning. For the first time in his life, he understood how invisible ordinary workers often became. He noticed how customers thanked managers but ignored cleaners. How executives smiled at wealthy clients but barely acknowledged receptionists. How respect seemed tied to job titles instead of character. Every day his disguise taught him another lesson no business school ever could. One Friday evening, heavy rain began falling just before closing time. Most employees rushed to their cars. Emily remained inside. She was helping an elderly customer whose umbrella had broken. Without hesitation, She took off her own raincoat and wrapped it around the woman. "But what about you?" the customer asked. "I'll be fine. You'll get soaked." Emily simply smiled. "I drive faster than you do." The elderly woman left with tears in her eyes. Ethan watched everything from the entrance. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen kindness that expected absolutely nothing in return. When Emily finally stepped outside, she was already drenched. Without saying a word, Ethan walked beside her, holding his umbrella over both of them. She laughed. "Now you're the one getting wet. I don't mind." For several blocks, they walked through the rain in comfortable silence. Then Emily spoke. "My dad left when I was 7. Ethan glanced at her. "My mom raised me by herself." "I'm sorry." She shrugged gently. "It made me appreciate honest people." After a moment, she added, "I've met wealthy men before. And they always seem too busy protecting what they own to care about people." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. If she knew who he really was, would she look at him the same way? He wanted to tell her. More than once the words reached his lips. But fear always stopped him. Not fear of losing his fortune. Fear of losing the first person who had ever treated him like an ordinary man. Across the city, inside the Carter family headquarters, Richard Carter stared at a report lying on his desk. His private investigator had finally located Ethan. The report included photographs. One showed Ethan standing at the entrance of a small Carter National Bank branch, wearing a faded security uniform. Richard remained silent for several moments. Then he smiled. "So, you actually did it." His assistant waited nervously. "Should I bring him home?" Richard slowly closed the folder.
No.
"Let him continue." "But sir, what if someone discovers who he is?" Richard looked out the window. "I have a feeling my son isn't the only one being tested." He paused before adding one final instruction. "Keep watching, especially the young woman he's been spending time with." Neither of them realized that someone else inside the bank had already started asking questions. And before long, the biggest secret in the building would no longer belong to Ethan alone. Nearly 3 months had passed since Ethan Carter became Ethan Brooks. What had started as an experiment had become the happiest season of his life. He no longer woke up thinking about board meetings or billion-dollar investments. Instead, he looked forward to simple conversations with Emily before the bank opened. Some mornings they shared coffee. Other afternoons they sat on a bench across the street, eating sandwiches while watching people rush through their busy lives. For the first time, Ethan felt seen. Not as an heir, not as a billionaire, just as himself. But secrets never stay hidden forever. Inside the branch, manager Daniel Morrison had begun noticing strange details. The new security guard spoke with unusual confidence. He knew far too much about finance. He remembered customers' names after meeting them only once. One afternoon, Daniel accidentally walked into the break room and overheard Ethan explaining mortgage rates to a young teller. His explanation was clearer than anything Daniel himself could have given. After Ethan left, Daniel frowned. How does a security guard know that? Curiosity quickly turned into suspicion. Daniel quietly asked Human Resources to send Ethan's employment file again. When it arrived, something immediately caught his attention. The file had been approved directly from corporate headquarters. That had never happened for temporary security employees. He made a phone call to someone he knew in the main office. "I need you to look into this employee." Off the record. The answer came the following morning. "We can't access his full records. They're restricted." Daniel's eyes widened. Restricted? For a temporary security guard? Something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Ethan's relationship with Emily continued growing. One Saturday, she invited him to volunteer at the children's shelter where she spent every weekend. The old building needed repairs. Tables were broken. Walls needed painting. The playground fence leaned dangerously to one side. Without hesitation, Ethan rolled up his sleeves. He repaired benches, fixed broken doors, installed new shelves, even rebuilt part of the playground using scrap wood stored behind the shelter. The director watched him in amazement. "You've done this before?" "My grandfather taught me when I was little." In reality, Ethan had spent summers learning carpentry from his grandfather before the family fortune consumed every minute of his schedule. Watching children laugh on the repaired playground brought him a happiness money had never purchased. Later that afternoon, Emily handed him a bottle of water. "You know, you never complain. Most people would." Ethan smiled. "I've had a very comfortable life. I think it's time I earned some of it." Emily laughed. "If only more people thought like you." Those words hit him harder than she realized. If only she knew. That evening, as they walked home together beneath the orange glow of the streetlights, Emily suddenly stopped. "Ethan." He turned toward her. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Have you ever wanted more than this?" He looked around. The quiet neighborhood, the old apartment buildings, the small restaurants. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't you ever wish you were rich?" He smiled softly. "I used to think I did. And now I think being rich and being happy aren't always the same thing." Emily studied his face for several seconds. "I like that answer." Without thinking, she reached for his hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to disappear. Then she leaned closer. Very gently, she kissed him. It lasted only a few seconds. But for Ethan, it felt like the beginning of an entirely new life. She hadn't kissed a billionaire. She had kissed a man she believed earned an ordinary paycheck protecting a neighborhood bank. And that made it priceless. The following Monday, Carter National Bank prepared for its annual Investors Appreciation Gala. Executives from every branch would attend. Manager Daniel Morrison saw the event as the perfect opportunity. The mysterious security guard's file still bothered him. If corporate was hiding something, he intended to expose it publicly. The day before the gala, another confidential envelope arrived on his desk. Inside was a single photograph. Ethan, standing beside Richard Carter several years earlier at a charity event. Daniel stared at the image, then at the security cameras showing Ethan working in the lobby. His mouth slowly fell open. "No, it can't be." He flipped the photograph over. Written on the back were only 6 words. Ethan Carter, sole heir to Carter National Bank. Daniel's heart began racing. He looked toward the lobby where Ethan was politely helping an elderly customer carry her walker through the front entrance. The richest man in the building was still wearing a cheap security guard uniform. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. He wasn't planning to protect Ethan's secret. He was planning to use it. The Investors Gala would be attended by Richard Carter himself. Hundreds of executives would be watching. Daniel imagined exposing the billionaire's son in front of everyone. It would be the biggest moment of his career. As Ethan finished helping the elderly customer, he noticed Daniel staring at him from across the lobby. Their eyes met. Daniel smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. For the first time since starting his disguise, Ethan felt that something was terribly wrong. He had no idea that, in less than 24 hours, his secret and his relationship with Emily were about to be tested before the entire Carter banking empire. The ballroom of the Grand Regency Hotel sparkled beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. More than 500 guests filled the room. Bank executives, major investors, business partners, politicians. Every Carter National Bank branch manager had been invited to celebrate another record-breaking year. For Ethan, however, the evening had nothing to do with profits. He had finally decided. After the event, he was going to tell Emily the truth himself. No more lies. No more disguises. She deserved honesty. Emily had only agreed to attend because several branch employees insisted that support staff should also be present. She wore a simple navy blue dress that looked elegant without trying to compete with the luxury surrounding her. As Ethan looked at her across the ballroom, he smiled. She was the most beautiful person in the room. Not because of the dress. Because of her heart. Unfortunately, someone else had different plans. As Richard Carter stepped onto the stage to begin his annual speech, manager Daniel Morrison quietly approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with an arrogant smile, "before our chairman speaks, I'd like to recognize one employee whose dedication has certainly surprised all of us." Confused applause echoed through the room. Daniel looked directly at Ethan. security guard Ethan Brooks. Would you please come to the stage? Emily smiled proudly. Go on, she whispered. You've earned it. Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. Still, he slowly walked toward the stage. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. For months, this man has pretended to be someone he isn't. The room became silent. Daniel pulled a photograph from his jacket and held it high. I believe everyone deserves to know the truth. He turned toward Richard Carter. Mr. Carter, would you care to explain why your son has been working as a security guard in one of your own branches? A wave of shocked whispers swept through the ballroom. Emily's smile disappeared instantly. Her eyes moved from the photograph to Ethan, then back again. She couldn't breathe. No, she whispered. That's impossible. Daniel continued triumphantly. He lied to every employee. He deceived this entire company. He manipulated honest people for months. He looked at Ethan with satisfaction. I suppose the game is over. Richard Carter slowly walked toward the center of the stage. The ballroom became completely silent. Daniel expected congratulations. Instead, Richard stopped in front of Ethan. For several long seconds, father and son simply looked at each other. Then Richard smiled. I think you've proven your point. He turned toward the audience. My son didn't spend 3 months pretending to be poor because he enjoys games. He wanted to answer one question. Can someone truly love a man before knowing his wealth? Richard looked across the ballroom until his eyes found Emily. And I believe he found his answer. Many executives lowered their heads in embarrassment. They remembered every order they had barked at Ethan, every dismissive glance, every insult, every moment they had judged a man by his uniform. Richard's voice grew firmer. The greatest failure in banking isn't losing money. It's losing the ability to recognize human dignity. No one applauded. The silence itself carried more weight than applause ever could. Emily finally stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes. She looked directly at Ethan. Was any of it real? Ethan answered without hesitation. Every conversation, every laugh, every feeling. My name was the only lie. She searched his face, hoping to find some sign that he was still hiding something. When were you going to tell me? Tonight. I was terrified. Not of losing my fortune, but of losing you. Emily closed her eyes. You should have trusted me. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit. Ethan instinctively followed. Outside, light rain had begun to fall. Emily. She stopped but didn't turn around. When I met you, she said softly, I thought I'd found the first man who didn't need to impress anyone. You did. I just didn't know he was hiding behind another name. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan removed the expensive watch he had been forced to wear for the gala. He placed it on a nearby bench. Then he took off his suit jacket. I'm still the man who carried grocery bags. The man who fixed the playground. The man who shared sandwiches with you outside the bank. I can't erase the lie. But everything you loved about me was real. Emily slowly turned toward him. She could see no arrogance in his eyes. No pride. Only regret. She stepped closer. I don't need a billionaire. I need an honest man. I know. And from now on, there won't be any more secrets. After several emotional seconds, she wrapped her arms around him. The embrace wasn't perfect. Trust would take time to rebuild. But it was a beginning. 1 year later, another celebration was held. This time, not for investors. For a wedding. Richard Carter stood before hundreds of guests and smiled. I spent my life believing money protected my family. I was wrong. It was character that protected my son. The applause was overwhelming. Among the guests were the branch employees who had once ignored Ethan. Many approached him to apologize. Ethan accepted every apology with grace. Daniel Morrison also came forward, ashamed. I judged your uniform instead of your character. Ethan shook his hand. I hope you never make that mistake again. Daniel nodded silently. Months later, after becoming CEO of Carter National Bank, Ethan made one unexpected change. Every new executive was required to spend 2 weeks working in an entry-level position inside a branch before receiving any promotion. Some became receptionists. Others cleaned offices. Some worked in customer service. Others stood at the front entrance, wearing a security uniform. Whenever anyone asked why the policy existed, Ethan simply smiled. Because hanging on the wall of his office was an old, faded security badge inside a glass frame. Below it, a small plaque read, "The day I stopped being treated like a billionaire was the day I finally discovered who truly loved me."